Hello there and welcome back to the Closet Historian and back to my studio for another crafting project. And I know I said last time that, I was trying to warn you that there was going to be a lot of beading this month, but even I didn't realize just how true that was about to become. And today, surprising no one, I do have another Beaded Beetle project for you. And warning, bug images in 3, 2, 1. This is a shield beetle. And seeing as I have a more heraldic or like kind of medieval fairy tale themed lookbook coming up, I thought, what if I made a shield beetle with a shield, like a shield beetle? Is it too punny? Maybe, but stay with me. I think it came out really cute. So I made this little antique colored shield beetle as a sort of proof of concept here. I really needed to make two, however, because I had an idea to go ahead and drape some beads between two brooches like this costume from Elizabeth the Golden Age, because I've always really, really loved this costume, and not just because it's purple, but also because it has this sort of Victorian morning jet drape across the front of it that I just think is so pretty. It's a little bit militaristic, but in a very jewelry feminine way, and I wanted to go ahead and replicate the look on an outfit of my own using my beaded beetles as the brooch connectors, which does mean I will need another one of these, so let's go ahead and get started. And here's my first shield beetle once again, kind of a patinaed and antique finish, subtler finish going on this one, and I will be copying those same colors onto this larger beetle. Although for this one, instead of doing just a straight across checkerboard, I did a little bit of an angle on this one. I do believe in heraldry it's called party colored. Not party as in like party down, but like party as in partial colored or split colored when things in heraldry are like this. Of course, somewhere along the way, shields became coats of arms, and there's just like a lot going on in between. So I don't really know very much about this. There are lots of experts on heraldry and shield design, I'm sure, but for me, I just wanted to go with something that looked vaguely Renaissance fair-ish. We're not going for a particular time period, of anything in life when it's me. I usually just am vaguely inspired by certain things and end up mashing them together. So for a lot of the stuff I've been working on, it's a little bit steampunk, a little bit medieval, a little bit ancient Greek and Roman kind of thrown in, and then a little bit Renaissance, taking elements that I like from each and mashing them all together. Now, if you've seen me make any of my beaded bug brooches here on the channel before, bugs and arachnids, as I have made a few spiders, and some moths, and even some butterflies, of course, before, but primarily I make a lot of beetles. And this, of course, is an extra, extra large one today, and the least realistic of all insects I've created so far. But I start with a piece of craft felt here, and then just regular Gutermann sewing thread on, like all-purpose sewing thread, on my size 10 Beadle-On beading needles that I do prefer. And then I'm using size 4 sequins here in a matte gold finish, and then in a matte copper finish. Both of these sequins I picked up from Cartwright's Sequins online, my favorite source for sequins. Again, none of this is sponsored. I just like to be detailed about what materials I'm using in case you would like to use the same ones. And if you've ever seen those fabrics where you can kind of press all the sequins up in one direction or press them all down one direction, usually they're two different colors or something's printed on one side. Same sort of idea. They're sewn on in the same sort of way, I guess. And all I'm doing here is just a row of sequins where I am like kind of chain stitching across the back and then back stitching into each sequin. Hopefully you can kind of tell what I mean if you've ever seen how sequins are sewn on before. I think I might even have drawn a graphic of this once upon a time when making one of these videos. So I'll try and see if I can find that so you can see exactly what I'm doing here in a static graphic as opposed to motion. But basically, once I have this first row on, I'm going to flip them all down, and then I will sew on the next row back up so that I can still be working in the same exact way I just did the other row, just in the other direction. And again, I will flip those all the way I want them, just so that I have the rows alternating between flipped up and flipped down. It just adds a little bit of extra sparkle and visual interest to this because of the way the light hits the different rows of sequins that are facing different directions. Of course, you could fill in a beetle like this any which way you would like to. I'll just be using rows of sequins for 2 of these sections and then filling in the other 2 sections with my more usual sort of randomized, impressionistic, Klimt-ish looking bead fill, which you'll see in a moment. But I'll fill in this entire top zone here with these stripes of sequins, which, being that they are kind of a matte sequin, and then I have the rows facing alternating directions like this, really give it a subtle, sparkly effect with a lot of depth. And I'll tie off my thread on the back and get started on the next section below. I won't show you that. It's going to be the same. Again, just rows of sequins to fill that in. And once I have that bottom section filled in as well, I'll start working on adding lots of beadwork to this, since we've only used sequins so far. I'm going to start by adding on this little diamond-shaped bead. It's a style of check bead, I think. I'll have to list them below, the diamondy beads. That's what I will list them as. I think they're probably 5 by 7 millimeter, if I had to guess. Beads that have 2 holes through them, and I just put one of those in the center to sort of finish off that point. I ended up using a little bit of gold work thread around that in the end as well, just to finish it off and make it look a little bit more polished. But for both of these beaded sections, I'm going to be stringing on lengths of beads, as you can see. I'm using bugle beads, size 11 seed beads, size 15 seed beads, some square seed beads, some triangular seed beads, and then also these tilla or tila beads that are the squares that have multiple holes in them that are often used for bracelets or like woven beadwork, but I like using them in this sort of Klimtian impressionistic manner in my beadwork. I'm just going to string on a long length of those and then go back up the length of the string of beads, couching them down to the felt below. And I will just do more and more rows of beads in that same way. So I strung on all the beads I wanted in one length of thread, and I'm just going over that length of thread now and couching it down, taking little stitches over the thread between the beads to secure it down to the felt below. Completely alternating the pattern of the beads, using 2, 3, 4 seed beads, using some bugle beads, using some tilas, really just mixing up the patterning of these, trying to make it as random as possible. Weirdly, when you are a human with a lot of pattern recognition going on, it can be kind of hard to get a random look. So truly, if like one of the beads falls off the end of the needle, instead of going to grab it, I kind of allow the universe to have made that meant I needed to in that row, trying to make this as random as possible, but in a very particular way. And where I have maybe tiny gaps, I will go ahead and fill those in with size 15 seed beads, which are the smallest size that I have. And then I also use gold work embroidery thread like this, check pearl, metal metallic, like coiled threads. I can link to my favorite supplier of those below as well. Those are really good for filling in small little spaces and gaps as well. And if I end up with larger gaps, I will fill in with larger beads. I'm trying to keep everything kind of linear and squared off so that this has a geometric sort of effect to it, with a sort of square on square kind of pattern. Tying off my thread when I need to start a new thread, and just continuing on in this same fashion to fill in the entire lower section. Now, of course, you can add more pattern into this. One of the ways I do that normally is to have the outside edge of the beetle or of the shape be in darker tones of beads and the center being in lighter tones, or vice versa, to give it a little bit more of a volume look visually, just because of color. Of course, you can switch up the color of this too and gradate the color. So if you wanted to start with beads that were more gold at the top and move into more blue beads, that would be another way to do this for this particular color scheme I have going on here. Of course, I'm just mixing everything up all together. Lots of shades of gold, bronze, and copper, and then of course that sort of patinaed or verdigris green shade in here as well. I like to lay out a lot of different materials that I think I might use for a section, and then I can pick and choose as I go, see what works. If I string something on and I don't like it, I'll take them off and try again. Just a little bit of a trial and error thing going on here. And it starts to look a little bit like this, and I will finish couching everything down and filling in any gaps here. I may end up with more gaps once I start to create the shape of the beetle itself and go from this flat, well, sort of flat, felt surface into a more 3D rounded beetle shape in a moment. Sometimes the rows of beads aren't closely packed together enough, so I start ending up with a few gaps, and I'll just fill those in with more gold work thread later. But this is what this looks like after I have it all together. Again, it's particular, and yet it's not particular. It really is quite random. But I will fill in this top quadrant here the same exact way with more beads, in the same sort of irregular pattern. Now I did finally try a brick stitched edge on this other first beetle, but honestly I feel like it added an hour of time to making the beetle, or at least, that didn't really show in the resulting product. Like, I don't feel like it looked that much more finished than they normally do, so I'm just going to go around the edge with a strand of couched beads for this whole thing, and I'm not going to, once I cut apart and made the beetle on the first one, I did that brick stitch around the edge too, to finish it off a little bit more. That's how many of these sort of brooches are finished. Picot stitch or brick stitch around the edges of them to really give them a nice finished edge, but just for my work, I don't find it necessary. So I'm going to continue to not do that. I did it on the other one, on like the practice beetle, and I decided against it for this next one. So sorry about that. If you ever want to see me do those sorts of edge work, apparently I'm not the gal for you. I'm just going around now and kind of outlining with the darker bronze Charlotte cut size 11 beads I was using for this. I can link to the store where I found these Charlotte cut bronze beads below, because they do have some gorgeous different colorways of beads. You do have to order all the way from India, so it takes quite a while, but they have some really unique seed beads, so it's probably worth it. And for this little diamond-shaped head of my beetle here, I am just filling in that entire expanse of felt of blank space here at the top with chip work, which is where you take gold work thread like this. This is called check pearl, so it's a little bit sparklier. Cut this into tiny little bead length sections and then use them almost like beads, just randomly filling in a space. You can do this in a very official gold work embroidery, Royal School of Needlework kind of way, or you can just throw them in there, which is what I'm doing today, because my embroidery is for me. It's not for like exhibition, or I'm not being tested on it. I don't need it to be absolutely perfect. I guess what I'm saying is you can really dial in and do chip work perfectly properly, but that's not what I'm doing today. So don't judge me against perfect chip work. That's not exactly what I'm after. But yes, just going around everything I've done so far with an outline of these size 11 bronze Charlotte cut seed beads. Charlotte cut seed beads are where it's a rounded seed bead. Just one side of it has been sliced off, so it has a facet to it, just a single facet to it, and they do catch the light a little bit more than a regular seed bead. And this beetle is starting to look like his cousin, so that's good. I do need to finish this off with a few more larger bronze beads at the top for the eyes, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Before then, I need to fold in all my little edges and create this into a beetle shape. So I like to clip my corners. Shocking, I know. Just like I do in sewing. I have to clip my corners and start folding this felt to the inside. Again, I don't have a particular system for doing this. It's all just sort of what feels best in the moment for me. And sometimes I do feel I need to pad these up a little bit more. So I will take some of these scrap felt cuttings that I've cut off of this and start using them to kind of infill some of the depressed areas on the other side, basically. Just padding up different areas with a little bit more felt if I feel they need to be more rounded. And this is the part where my stitching is very messy because it will all be covered in the end. It's all structural stitching as opposed to stylistic stitching. None of this will be seen in the end. It's just to hold everything in place on the underside. So I just use big whip stitches to hold stuff in place and hopefully at the correct tension to get the shape I'm after. This is where this almost becomes a little bit like sculpting with felt, which is a whole genre of craft in itself. And this actually is wool blend felt, so it does behave pretty well. Not full acrylic felt is what you'll usually find at the craft store, but online, unsurprisingly, you can find anything, including wool blend craft felt. And again, like I had mentioned, I did have a couple of gaps open up when I rounded this off, so I filled those in with a little bit more gold work thread. And then I will attach my large bronze beads up here to serve as eyes for this piece. These are the same beads that I will use to create the strings of beads that hang between these two beetles later, so I thought it would be good to incorporate at least a few of them into the beetles themselves to help make everything more homogeneous and fit together well in the end. And now for the legs on this particular beetle, I used a higher gauge of copper wire to do this. This is either a 22 or a 20 gauge wire. I can't quite remember, and the package is lost to history, sadly. I don't work with wire enough to know without seeing the package, I'm sorry. But it's not too thick that I can't string on seed beads, so that's good. I'll just use some of those bronze beads and the bronze seed beads as well to start creating my antenna. Stringing on as many beads as I'd like, and then I kind of create a little W shape out of the wire to hold those beads in place and give me something textured to hold on to when I start sewing this onto the back of my beetle. So I'll just use the very end of my round nose pliers down here to bend that into a little sort of W shape. That usually works. Sometimes I bend them into a sort of H shape. I bend these into different shapes depending on which wire I'm using or what I feel I need most in that moment, depending on the shape of legs or antenna I am attaching to my current project. I will string beads on the same way for the other side. I just cut and round off the ends of these wires, and then I will take my crimp tool, which is not for this purpose at all, and you'll see I try and use my plier and it doesn't work as well, but I really prefer the crimping tool for this, to give the little rings on the ends of these a kind of hammered finish. So I like to squeeze them flat a little bit just for a finished look to them. I tried to use the flat plier here and it was not the same. So I went back to my crimp tool. For some reason, this gives me better leverage to go ahead and press this wire into a more flattened, hammered shape. And at this point, I realized I still needed to add some structure to the back of this beetle to sew these antenna and legs onto, so I'm grabbing a piece of hat-making buckram here. This is stiffened cotton or paper, like in a woven pattern, basically. So all this is, you could use card, or like even like a cardboard for this, or a piece of leather or thick fabric, just something that is a little bit more structured to remove some of the floop from this piece, just to stiffen it a little bit so that it is a bit more robust, and we can start sewing on the wire pieces and the pin backing and things like that. And I will stitch on my antenna here. I'm using kind of a blanket stitch for this, but I'm also just whipping it down and attaching it any which way, trying to keep my stitches small and hidden, and yet also very secure so that these wire pieces stay on to my beetle. And here he is with his antenna. I'm just letting that thread hang out here while I start making some of the legs. Of course, this being a beetle, it will need 6 legs. Of course, if you're making an arachnid, you'll need 8 legs. I've yet to make a crab. I really need to make a crab, especially as a Cancer. So, sea life. I've yet to experiment with sea life, but I want to make a crab next. Sometime. But again, I just turn the end of the wire to kind of finish it off and string on more beads for my legs. One of the things I incorporate with the legs is I start using sequins as beads. So I just string on sequins, usually 1 or 2, 3 or 4 at a time, to create a kind of bead out of the sequin. So that's part of what I incorporate with these legs. It gives them a little bit more heft and a little bit more texture, depending on the size of sequin I use. And I am using all different sides of seed beads and some 3mm check glass beads as well in here. English cut 3mm check glass beads. Eventually I will learn all the names and sizes for beads. We're just not quite there yet, you know. But I'm bending those into shape. As you can see, I like doing a leg for each side and then doing a crossbar in between them that kind of connects those legs so that when I move one, it kind of affects the other. And it gives everything a lot more stability to have these crossbars across the back and have 2 legs on each thing. Using cross pieces either vertically or horizontally really helps in these legs feeling a lot less flimsy. And then I sewed on my pin back as well. I usually do stitch all the way through the entire beetle, out to the beaded side and then back through. Those stitches get hidden in between beads and sequins on the other side so they're not really seen, and it makes this pin back feel very secure on here. Then I cut a piece of felt, of course, to cover everything. That matches the size of my beetle. And then I will use a marker to mark where the ends of my pin back are, so I can cut little slits in this felt, and that way the pin back can, like the functional part of the pin back, pokes through this felt and everything else is hidden underneath it. So this is kind of my last layer that cleans up the back for me, and all my messy stitching gets hidden. A lot of people use leather for this, but I just find felt works just fine for me, and it helps like not that felt is sticky, but it helps this brooch stay in place on my clothes because the felt has a little bit of grip to it. It's like fuzzy. It's not true, Velcro or anything, but I think it does help keep my brooch in place. And to finish up, I just go all the way around the edges, getting stuck on these legs the whole dang time with a blanket stitch to secure this felt down and finish it off. And then because I need to attach my lengths of beads between these, I sewed down some large jump rings onto the back of these just so that I could clip on some lobster clasps that I used to finish off my strands of beads. And I did string those beads, a seed bead between each one, gradating the size, of course. I have 5 strands here. I can measure them for you and put that in the description. And I attach those to a multi-strand connector, and then that connector to the lobster claw, which then connects to the beetle. Hopefully, again, you can see what I mean. And here this is clipped onto one of my more militaristic blazers, so you can get an idea of the sort of look I'm going for here. This is not the final outfit this is for, but you'll be seeing that shortly. And of course, I can wear these beetle brooches without the beaded sash, either together or on their own, which gives me a lot of always welcome versatility.
And thus,
the Order of the Beaded Beetle has been created. I'm excited to wear this and show you what I actually have in mind for this little draped jewel thing. These are rather subtly shields. I like to do some that are more like obviously and sort of traditionally heraldic in the future. Maybe in black and green or black and yellow, no surprise there. Now, I'm not sure what you have to do to earn a Order of the Beaded Beetle regalia. I think you just probably have to finish beading a beetle. So if you've done that, I think you're in. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this little crafting project today, and thank you as always for watching. I'll be back with more sewing, vintage fashion, costuming, and crafting real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye.